Hello and welcome to a special weekend edition of Spectator TV, where we are going to talk about the very dramatic story that broke out from America last night after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania.
They see something that said, take a look at what happened.
The first thing to note, I would say, is that it was incredibly close. If Donald Trump's head had been just a few inches to one side, we would now be talking about the death and the killing of Donald Trump on the presidential trail last night. I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Andrews, our economics editor, who has already written a piece under a headline, not a headline I ever thought I'd read you right, Kate, that today we are all MAGA. First of all, let's talk about that point, just about how close it was. I mean, we're talking centimeters from Donald Trump being killed last night.
He is incredibly lucky to be alive. The video footage is very clear. It's very frightening to watch. You see, you hear the bullets, you hear the shots. You see as his ear is hit. It isn't really a delayed reaction. It's just clear, though he still hasn't quite clocked what's going on. Nobody has. And then he ducks and the shots continue. And that is when the entire crowd starts to dawn upon them what exactly is taking place. There's a lot of blood in the video. The bullet very much hit the side of his head. It looks like his ear. We still don't have full medical details, although we have seen footage of Trump getting off a plane overnight, landing back in New Jersey. He is walking off that plane, so we know that he is in fairly okay condition, and statements from his presidential team have confirmed that as well. It's horrifying stuff. And as you say, Freddie, if his head had been ever so slightly tilted in a different direction, it is very possible right now we would be talking about a successful assassination attempt.
Obviously, sort of naked political calculations are already being formed, and a lot of people on social media are saying that this must be good news for Donald Trump's presidential campaign, that his reaction, which was almost insanely courageous, standing up and fighting, shouting, fight, fight, fight. Appreciate a lot of commentators think that that's not the sort of rhetoric that America needs. But I think most Americans watching that will think he was incredibly brave, and it will probably be a good thing for his re-election effort.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we have probably never been more confident that Donald Trump is on track to become president of the United States once again. Look, I don't say that with full confidence. And I never have been able to, mainly because the American people have rejected Donald Trump twice now, once in the 2020 election, and then they rejected his candidates in the 2022 midterm elections for the most part. I think a lot of Americans, even in the Republican camp, have been desperate to move on in some capacity, but Biden's economy has been frustrating voters. And of course, there was the disastrous debate performance for Joe Biden, and the attempts at interviews to clear that up have only continued to work against the president. But this is different. Let's put the language aside for just a minute. I think what's really coming out of what happened only hours ago are the standalone images of Trump making the choice to stand up and wait, to pause, and then to lift his fist to the crowd. And I think that is so important because for a lot of Americans, they will be thinking, well, he of course didn't have information at the time that this shooter was no longer active. They didn't know how many shooters there might be. They didn't know if there was still a risk. And you could hear the crowd, who are also probably terrified for their lives at that point. And we should note that somebody has died from this attack. Tragically, a rally attendee has died from this, and there are a few others in critical condition. They also paused and decided to respond to what the president was doing. It is a momentous still. It is a huge moment. And in the video, we now know, we can tell what he was mouthing, but in the video, you can't really hear the words that he's mouthing. You just see the imagery. And as you say, Freddie, I think that imagery is incredibly powerful. What do you make of his decision to stand up and do that? I don't think anyone would have faulted him if he had just got off the stage.
I was struck that even in moments of great peril and possible tragedy, Donald Trump is always at one level hilarious, because he did say, "I just want my shoes. Let me get my shoes on," which is very Trumpy to be very concerned about his shoes at that particular moment. But I did think, he is incredibly gutsy. He always has been. And he, it's not cynical to say this about Donald Trump, but he recognizes the political opportunity there instantly, which is why he's another reason why he's such a brilliant campaigner. And you will get a lot of people saying, "Oh, fight, fight, fight" is not the sort of rhetoric we want. And on CNN, within seconds of the incident happening on CNN, pundits were already saying, "Oh, that's not the sort of language we need at this moment." But he'd very nearly just been killed, so he was probably quite adrenaline fueled. And I think most Americans looking at it will think, "What a tough guy! That's the sort of tough guy we need." And compare and contrast with Joe Biden, who is, of course, in very frail condition. Joe Biden and Barack Obama's statements about the incident, Jacob Halbrook put it well on our website, they were tepid, somewhat tepid. I think Democrats do hate Trump so much that they find it hard sympathizing with him, even in an emergency situation like this. But we'll see. Perhaps later today, Joe Biden will give a bigger, more candid and kind response to the incident. I think that overall, it's also probably rash to say that this is, Donald Trump just guaranteed he will be re-elected. So many things can happen between now and an election day. I think it's probably introduced an element of instability into the MAGA movement, which could be a negative for Trump in the election. I mean, a lot of MAGA Republicans often talk about, the way the world hates Trump and so on, and that can be off-putting to independents in the mainstream. So if you see sort of outpourings of MAGA radicalism, if you like, that might be a negative in the election. I don't think so, though. I think generally this can only be a good thing for his re-election chances. And as you said at the beginning, he's just very, very lucky to have survived this attempt. And of course, thank God that he did, because if we were having this conversation, as we said at the start, with his head 3 inches to the right or the left, whatever it was, then we would be talking about a much more dangerous situation where America was in flames.
The pollster Frank Luntz put out an interesting comment on X this morning, saying that he suspects that people who are sympathizing with Donald Trump right now over this assassination attempt will still return to their natural political home by the time you get to November. But he said what he thinks does guarantee is that Trump supporters, if you were already a Trump supporter, there's no doubt that you're going to miss out on polling day, whereas the Democrats already had an uphill battle, and they know it, getting enthusiasm around their candidate at the moment, who is disappointing quite a lot of people, to say the least, when it comes to those debates and when it comes to the comments and appearances that he's having to make on the national and international stage. And as you say, Freddie, showing support or sympathy for Donald Trump today does not translate to a vote. I have written an article for the Spectator's blog this morning saying, "Today we are all MAGA." I have no intention of voting for Donald Trump come November, as I haven't in the past. That was a historical reference to the conversation that is said to have taken place between Ronald Reagan and his surgeons when he was shot in March 1981. Of course, Reagan used humor even in the darkest of moments. I think it is a main reason he was so successful. And he is reported to have said to his surgeons when he entered the hospital after being shot, "I hope you're all Republican," to which one of the doctors is reported to have said, "Today, Mr. President, we are all Republicans." And I think the idea here is that a lot of people are saying, well, just say we're all American. You can condemn the violence without embracing the MAGA movement. Well, of course, but this isn't really embracing the MAGA movement. Just as back then, it wasn't really about going out and voting Republican or saying that you now believe in all Republican policies. It's acknowledging that when we politically disagree with somebody, there are still fundamental institutions and principles and ideals that Americans uphold that you can transcend your own political beliefs just for a minute and stand in solidarity with someone who has had something absolutely terrible happen that should never, ever happen in a free, democratic nation. I find it remarkable how difficult that's becoming, though. This idea that you have to plant your flag, you have to identify one way or the other, and you always have to make very clear that you find the other disgusting and despicable, even if they've just been shot at. Tomorrow those debates will resume. Trust me, they're not going anywhere. Tomorrow, the Republicans and Democrats will dive right back into how awful the other side finds the other. It's just today, in this moment, where you would hope that a little bit of solidarity might exist.
That's something I found quite ridiculous, just looking at the response on social media of people saying, I'm no big fan of Donald Trump, but obviously I don't want this. It doesn't matter. we don't we don't assume that because you're not a fan of Donald Trump that you want him to be murdered.
Of course
I think
not.
it's very odd the way people react like that. I also think this there's a lot of talk on the networks about how we're in this toxic political moment, and America is rife with sort of partisanship, bitterly divided, and so on. Yes, American politics is quite toxic a lot of the time, but to say this is anything new is absurd and historically ignorant. You've pointed out Ronald Reagan was very nearly killed. I mean, 4 American presidents have been assassinated: Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, and JFK, of course, John F. Kennedy. And there have been countless other killings or attempted killings of candidates, and this is just one more incident in America's rich history of attempted political assassinations. And these assassinations attempts tend to be rarer and less successful now because of security. But the undercurrent of political violence in America has never gone away. It's always been there, and you do have a lot of guns, and so you do have this. It's an American. It's a part of American history that you can't just ignore, can you, Kate?
No, you certainly can't. And unfortunately, to be president or to run to be president has long had some very dangerous implications to that. And that's horrendous. It is also true, as you say, Freddie. And to say this time it's different, I mean, there are elements of it that are different. I think the cesspit of political despair that America has fallen into is quite notable compared to, say, maybe where we were 10 years ago. Things have changed. But a lot of those dangers have been present, throughout American history, as you very rightly point out. Um, I think we'd be slightly remiss if we didn't talk about some extent to which we got here. I mean, we are now living in an America where people deny the election result. And we saw what happened on January 6th, where people are desperately trying to lock up their political opponents, where to use words like dictator and despot has just become common. Nazi, fascist, these are common words now associated with how you talk about your political opponents. We do not know the details yet of the full motivation behind the shooter, who has also been killed. But Fred, with this assassination attempt, it also draws into focus that Donald Trump has not selected a vice presidential candidate yet. Had this been a slightly different circumstance and we were talking about a successful assassination attempt that would have created another level of political chaos, not knowing who the obvious Republican nominee might have ended up being. I think there's going to be a lot more. There was always going to be focus on who the VP pick was going to be, but I mean, this is now very serious stuff given what's just happened. Will this change Donald Trump's calculation about who he picks, and does he need to pick somebody more urgently?
Well, it is extraordinary to think, isn't it? If it would have been the week after, you would have Trump's vice president would have been confirmed. And if the assassin had hit Trump and killed him, the whoever that vice presidential choice is going to be, everybody thinks J.D. Vance or Doug Burgum at the moment, strong favourites, possibly Marco Rubio. Then, I mean, that J.D. Vance, Doug Burgum, or Marco Rubio would be in probably pole position to be the next president of the United States. So it's an extraordinary thing to reflect on. Um, will it change the calculation now that this has happened? I doubt it. I think they've settled on somebody, but you never know with Trump. The odds on J.D. Vance, which I've been following quite closely because for my sins I put a bet on him some time ago, insignificant bet, but he's now seems to be the clear favourite because Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump's son, has been pushing for J.D. Vance quite hard, we understand, and he is going to give a speech around the time of the nomination process for the vice presidential slot, I think on Wednesday. And so we believe that means it's going to be J.D. Vance, but you never know with Trump. He loves to surprise people. I think there's a lot of people in Republican circles who are opposed to J.D. Vance, particularly because of his views on trade and so on. And they are putting a lot of pressure on the Trump team to not nominate J.D. Vance and to nominate Doug Burgum instead. So we don't really know what will happen. But as you say, it's an extraordinary thing to think that, if it had been a bit later, that vice presidential choice could be within a matter of months in the White House.
And Fred, while we're here, the Democrats really have enough on their plate at the moment dealing with the current state of the president and a lot of infighting over whether or not he will end up being the Democrats' nominee. But of course, what has happened overnight has serious political implications for the Democrats as well. Everyone's going to be beefing up their security, no doubt. But how Democrats respond to this, especially when pitching to your average American, is probably going to matter very much because, as we were saying at the start of this conversation, you can absolutely take issue with particular ways in which, a matter of milliseconds, Donald Trump and others decided to respond to what was happening at this rally. But I suspect your average American is looking at this and thinking, this has gone too far. This was wrong. The former president has been very brave in this moment, and Democrats are going to need a response to those particularly independent voters or people who are feeling like they might swing in one direction or another. That is pretty thoughtful, I think, or at least a little bit more nuanced than what we've been getting.
Yes, well, and also it'll be interesting to see what happens with the lawfare with Donald Trump, which is to a large extent be paused. We may get the sentencing before the election. We may not now for the New York case, and obviously all the other cases look like they're being pushed down past the election. Given that we know the American public has responded positively to Trump and negatively to the Democrats over all the lawfare against him, will the Democrats bring that up? Will they now use the lawfare argument against Trump, given that most Americans will be thinking, hang on, the guy was just nearly killed? That will be an interesting thing to watch. I think it puts the Democrats into a difficult position, but as you suggest, there is also an opportunity for them to show great civility. So far, those statements have been tepid, and I think if you were a smart Biden campaign advisor, you would advise him to do a very, very heartfelt speech in response to this, if indeed he's capable of delivering a heartfelt speech. He probably can just about do one from a teleprompter, so I think it would be wise to do that politically on the Democratic side.
And let's be honest, if we want to talk about political opportunity, and we know both campaigns will be doing that, if the Democrats deliver something as heartfelt as you suggest, Freddie, there is an opportunity to then compare that to some of the previous comments Trump has made long before his own assassination attempt about other people, other candidates, other instances sometimes of taking things too far, especially when it comes to violent rhetoric. It's the kind of thing that the American people didn't like when they were voting in 2020 and 2022. So, Trump very often has the effect of bringing people down to the basis level of debate in politics. And I think One of the things that really helped Joe Biden in 2020, certainly with people like me, was, that we didn't want to drop that low, that you wanted to rise above it. This perhaps is the ultimate test. And the Democrats have a chance to rise to the occasion, or they have a chance to fail.
Kate Andrews, thank you very much for coming on to Spectator TV for this emergency weekend episode. And we will see you again, no doubt, next week.